I think this means that we got it started, right? All right, cool. Hi again, everybody. I am Jenna Severson. I am the Communications and Digital Manager for Economic Security for Illinois, which is an organization, a nonprofit organization that's a partner to Chicago Vote. So I'm very excited to be here with you and doing this training session. My pronouns are she, her, and I am coming to you live from Wicker Park in Chicago. So I think we have just a small crew with us that's on live. If folks want to just go around and say their name and maybe why they're here. Obviously, I am here today to train and to talk about financial freedom, and excited because I have a day job that allows me to do activism, which sometimes means stuff like this. So I don't know if Alex, you want to just kick it off?
Hello, Alex, she, her pronouns. I work for Chicago Votes. I am here because this is so important to me. When we talk about democracy and civic engagement, you can't talk about it without talking about financial freedom and just the huge wealth gap that is often one of the biggest obstacles for folks to even be involved in democracy. So I think this is super important. I'll pass it to Josh.
Hello, thank you so much for hosting this. I work at Chicago Votes. My pronouns are he, him, but in a past professional life, I worked in anti-poverty, mainly in food banking. I worked at Feeding America for a bit, specifically with the SNAP program. And so I'm always down to learn and hear about financial freedom type lessons because I spent so much time working in anti-poverty work. So I'm super excited to learn from you. And I'll pass it to Katrina.
Hello, Katrina Thompson, Digital Strategy Manager at Chicago Votes. And I'm super excited to be here to kind of learn about the difference between financial freedom and financial literacy. I will pass it to Julio.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Julio Miramontes, pronouns he, him, his. I'm here, I actually work for an alderman, director of policy, and I just want to learn more about, how to give folks ownership over, everything that they do, whether it's workers' rights or figuring out how, we can get, more ownership of things and more financial freedom for working class folks. So happy to be here.
There we go. I was still muted. Hopefully you can hear me again. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, small crew. And I can dive right into it. The first thing I do want to do is set the stage kind of on what economic security for Illinois is, because a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today stems directly from our work. So Economic Security for Illinois is a new on the scene nonprofit that we work for policy solutions that put cash directly in people's pockets. So our two big enemies are poverty and inequality. We see them as two sides of the same coin. I will definitely get into that later. And we're here because we want to right the wrongs of a system, specifically a taxation system, but a financial system in general that has prioritized one type of person for far too long and left a lot of people out. So they're big systemic issues, and we just don't want that. Alex already talked about it, the wealth gap to continue to grow, but also we want the ability for people who are here with us now to have an immediate type of solution so that they can thrive and survive in their lives. So we're lucky. Economic Security for Illinois, my organization, works in coalition with Chicago Votes and other nonprofits in the space, be it in Illinois. And we do have national partners. So they are grassroots groups, other nonprofits, labor groups that are all building power towards some of these economic solutions. And specifically here, we're working together on a few of them that are exciting. I'll talk about them more at the end when we're kind of do the action steps. But the way that I thought of this presentation and this training today was because the team, the Chicago Votes team came to us and said that they were interested in doing something about finances and doing something about financial literacy. And so that opens us up to the first question of our presentation, which is, what is financial literacy? Who does it benefit and who does it fail? So when thinking about this personally, I guess I can start off by saying, like, I have an issue with the term, and I have an issue with the term because financial literacy, like when you break it down to its dictionary definition, it's understanding like savings, assets, debt, having an overall sense of what your financial well-being is. But when you talk about it in the policy sense, it's often used as sort of something to replace other actual tangible solutions. So when we think about who it benefits and who it fails, often we're talking about how you can educate people to fit a system that was never built for them. So we think of it as something that is racist, and that you can't educate your way out of poverty, but you need to get to the root of the systemic issues. I will say, so just like framing this presentation for anybody who's watching online, if you want financial resources in terms of like how to actually invest and spend your money, they exist. I posted there as the image, the Reddit personal finance tree, which a lot of people do love, but there's some serious like good resources that you can refer to if you need help like deciding what to do with your banking and other things like that. But that's not what we're going to be talking about today. It's more about narratives and how we think about these things in the policy solution. Oh, excuse me, wrong button. Go to the next one. So that's why we're reclaiming and talking about it in terms of freedom. Freedom is not often a term that's used very much in the progressive spaces. But when we think about it, freedom in finances gives you the ability to meet your needs and then thrive. You don't have to think about where your money is going every day. And if you are to take any singular thing from this presentation, it would be this statement. So people in poverty don't need financial literacy. They need cash. They can't be educated out of poverty. They need the financial means to pull themselves out. So often, one of the things that we talk about is granting space for people to tell their own stories, because you have policymakers who are tinkering at the edges trying to decide what people need, when really people know what they need best. What they need is the cash to get themselves there. And, you know, we kind of talked about some of the ways that economic security sees this as both poverty and inequality. So going into some of the more granular details about like the state of poverty in Illinois, over 1 million people, 1.5 million people in our state are in poverty, which is a lot, far too many. But breaking it down a little bit further, we're going to look at the child poverty statistics. So if you look at those numbers, you see that 16.2% of Illinois children are in poverty, and that Black children are 4 times more likely to live in poverty. This kind of begets those ideas that zip code ends up being the largest determinant of your destiny, and it's the largest thing that determines how much money you will have at the end of the day. There's a bunch of studies that replicate this as true. But when we think about the problem that exists, we're in the wealthiest nation in the world, and yet in our state and in our country, these numbers match. They're a little bit higher. The child poverty rate is a little bit higher, but they match relatively on with what the rest of the United States is, and it's far too high for a country that has the most wealth of any other nation. And then additionally, in this problem, it's not getting better, it's getting worse. So 2020 saw the sharpest increase in poverty. And this is also, obviously you have the pandemic, but there are increasing trends about what deep poverty means and how hard it is for people to pull themselves out. So there's a study that went around that's quite well known that 40% of people do not have $400 to pull them out of an emergency if they were to have a financial emergency. So that means almost half of people don't have enough cash on hand if their car breaks down, if they have an emergent medical bill, that they don't have that money laying around in savings. And at the same time, it's also policy choices. We don't have those same types of structures and supports for people that exist. So I linked a bunch of the research, and that'll be available if you want to look into some of the stuff that I just noted. But as I mentioned previously, poverty is only one part of this. So the other part is inequality. We see them as two sides of the same coin at ESIL, and I think there's this wealth data visualization that I think is a really great way. Hopefully you can still see my screen. I'm gonna make it larger to see this. So this is a fun data visualization. I didn't make it, the person is attributed here somewhere. But if we just scroll through, you can kind of see, it's a fun way to look at it to see really what the state of inequality is in the world. So this is $1,000. It's this little itty bitty dot right here. This is the median household income in Chicago. It's a little bit lower, but for a family of four, it's like 73,000, and for a family in poverty, or for the majority of Chicagoans, it's about 52 or 58,000. This is what $1 million looks like. Okay, now we got $1 billion. It's pretty big. This is Jeff Bezos as well. So I'm going to scroll through here, and I'm going to keep the same pace the whole time just so you can see, and I will end up having to talk for a while. The visualization is really cool because it identifies things. So this is like a great one. Again, it will be linked, and if someone wants to drop it in the chat, it's a great one to sort of show people, to say, like, this is really, we kind of don't have a concept when we talk about wealth inequality in this nation. So it's rarely ever represented to scale, and we kind of lump millionaires and billionaires in the same camp when really it is just disgusting if you were to break it down. So I'm going to keep scrolling, and I apologize because it is going to take some time. But you can kind of see, yeah, we're a third of the way done. You can see the numbers just rack up, and again, they'll give you some facts here. So comparing it to some familiar things. So the money that you're going to earn in your entire life, it's in this little square, and I have stopped scrolling. So that's the average amount of money a person will earn from the day that they were born to the day that they die, which is $1.7 million. This is the cost of healthcare for a family of four. Look how small it is. I am still scrolling now, but look how small it is in comparison. This is the annual pay of an Amazon warehouse worker. And if you're like me and watched the, what is it called? The press conference, or excuse me, the interview where Jeff Bezos was talking and thanking us all for bringing him to space, you'll know that it's because he pays his people that little. So this is how much, if we were to call, stop scrolling again, if we were to house every single homeless veteran, this is how much it would cost. There's another one coming up here soon. This is if we were to give, just for 1 year, the chemotherapy cost covered for all cancer patients. So that's $9 billion. That's how much it fits. And then it says on July 20th, 2020, Jeff Bezos made $13 billion in a single day. So even the fortunes of the very rich people are dwarfed by the incomprehensible wealth of the 0.0001%. This is other relevant CEOs and like big business people. So this is a CEO of Goldman Sachs. I've stopped scrolling. The wealth of Beyonce, the wealth of Apple CEO Tim Cook, and the lifetime earnings of a doctor, of a lawyer, the lifetime earnings. Oh, did I pop? It's not scrolling for me anymore.
It was just too much money.
Much money, honestly. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Hedge fund manager. So in this point, I think is like the key. This is part of the key reason why I wanted to show you. Again, we're not done with Jeff Bezos' wealth, but this is it right here. These people see themselves as fabulously rich. These hedge fund managers and doctors and lawyers see themselves as fabulously rich, and they oppose the policies that we're trying to implement that would make sure that people pay their fair share. Now, I also think, if we go back, that these folks got to pay their fair share too. Anybody who was part of the fair tax fight in the state of Illinois definitely believes this. So there's just this idea, and I think it's a good exercise even for people who kind of, like myself, already know that wealth inequality is a super huge issue. It's good to know just how big we're talking about when we're talking about, like, okay, this is Zuckerberg and this is Bezos. So I think I do want to get to the end of this. It does go into all of the 400 richest people combined. But just to prove the point. Okay, here we go. Yes. So we got to the end of his wealth. And that is one person who's obviously an outlier. But when you look at the 1% in general, it's still an extremely unequal system. So I'm going to go back to the presentation now. Because, and actually I'm going to skip to a few slides and then go back. Cook County. So we just looked at all those numbers and that scale. The top 1% in Cook County makes 33 times more than the bottom 99% combined. So the top 1% in Cook County makes 1.7 million. Then we've got 52,000 for the rest of us all combined. And it's kind of middle of the road in terms of cities for wealth inequality. For some reason, Jackson Hole, Wyoming is like obscene. But there's certainly so much we could be doing if we had a taxation system that like equitably taxed everybody. So I'm gonna go back a few of the slides, sorry. The reason that inequality is a problem is because it drives disparities in everything else. So inequality is driving your disparity in housing and education and medical care and life expectancy, career opportunities, mental health outcomes, and then specific to the work that Chicago Votes team does, access to justice and democracy. So there's often that adage, like when we're looking at Chicago, that there's one map, right? The same map of inequality throughout, and you have relatively rich and or affluent and or people who aren't getting tickets, or people who aren't getting arrested, or people who have access to a grocery store, people who have access to banks, like all living here. And then you have the South and West sides that are experiencing the disparities in all other things. Wealth, I believe, is at the forefront, or excuse me, the root of all of these other things. And if we look at Illinois in general, so ESIL looks at Illinois because we want to impact change here. We would, of course, love to also impact change federally and nationwide, but Illinois specifically is really bad because out of the 50 states, we're the 8th worst in terms of income inequality. This is also happens to be the same rank that we have for tax inequality as well. So we have the 8th most regressive tax system, and we are in the 8th most regressive income system in terms of equality. And we already looked at these numbers, so breaking it down again, what that looks like. And just like poverty, inequality is getting worse, not better. It's risen exponentially, and I would actually argue that inequality is getting worse at an increasing rate and an exponential rate, which is quite a huge problem when you have so many, we have so many people who want to attend to poverty, but they're not looking at this other side of the coin. And there has been, I think the importance of having this start at 1980 is that there have been often these policy choices. And one of the most well-known is the Trickle-Down Economics theory, which is like Reaganites were big fans. And there was a 50-year study, just released this past year that demonstrated that like on every one of its own terms, trickle-down economics failed. But what it did most was create this just gross exaggeration between where people's wealth and where people's income has grown apart. So for the top 0.1%, they're just able to accumulate and amass all of this wealth. At the same time, we haven't had the investment in our infrastructure and the investment in our people. And you also see here that this rate that people at the bottom are growing is very, very small. So I think we can stop there. I just wanted to pause too and see if there's anything that in that part of the presentation that I didn't cover. And then the next part, we'll get into more of the narrative side and looking at specifically like the tools that we can use to reframe from financial literacy to financial freedom. So I'll pause, and if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask any questions or pop them in the chat, I can take them now. If there are any concepts that weren't discussed. All right, and you can, oh, go ahead.
Still just like absorbing that, like you scrolling through Jeff Bezos, like that was a really, really great visualization of just like even the folks that you think are so incredibly rich, like just not even comparing. And then I thought a lot about like what would an immediate like flush of like some of that money back into communities look like. Is that something that could be done through like an executive order, or does it have to be done through like a much more long-term like taxation system? Like what even allowed him to make 185 billion?
Unfortunately, we did. our failed systems did. Yeah, I definitely recommend the link. Katrina put the link in the chat, and then it'll be on the video. I 100% recommend like pulling up that link for that visualization and scrolling through yourself, because there's something about like touch. It works really well on the phone, one, and then two, like just like feeling that, like going through and seeing. And then the next part of it, which I didn't even get to, is that in comparison with the richest 400 people in the world, and that they have the majority of the wealth in the world, and they have some other like embedded visualizations. And it is really like, even doing this work, you do lump people together in terms of like wealthy people and not wealthy people. And our focus really is on this. Like if you were to go back on this graph, our focus still is going to be on this bottom line for like my organization and for many organizations that work on poverty. But there's this a huge gap that we don't often contend with. And there's the thing that's so sad about it is you just imagine all of the good that could be done, even if it were tampered here. So yeah, it's pretty disgusting what we've allowed to happen. All right, well, we can move on to the next piece unless anybody else has something to add. So now this is like kind of my area of expertise at ESIL, and in this work, I want to talk about narrative, because the narratives are what win policy wars. So it's in this level of the arena, we can have the best policy crafted in the world, but when you step aside to sort of think about how change is happening, it's really happening at the level of narrative. So narrative can be like the stories that were told, but it's really like stories that are told and reinforced over time. So it's not just like the messages in the headlines, but it's that the messages in the headlines tend to use these same type of descriptors over and over again for a certain type of person. Trickle-down economics for a long time was a narrative that demonstrated that the wealth would start at the top and then it would trickle down, and the idea being that like it was a narrative of deservingness and also a narrative of like having a good Samaritan type boss, and having people not be people who were in poverty were responsible for their own situation. So obviously, and then the other thing, just sort of like identifying so often in like this work in the work of policy, it's very rare. It's more often that you hear from somebody who looks like me, and it's not often that you hear from somebody who is directly impacted by an issue. So policymakers, while they are representatives of their community, look a lot the same, and they tend to govern based on their experience, and many of them are wealthy. And we also don't hear often enough from people who are in the throes of poverty and who are impacted by inequality on the daily basis. So the first thing that I want to do for y'all is go to an example of what I mean here. And these are some experts that I work with that are going to really be able to put a much better spin on it. I'm hoping that the video sound just works directly. I know you can see it, but I'm hoping that the sound plays appropriately. Can y'all hear it?
No, I think you may have to unshare your screen and reshare it with the computer sound.
Okay.
Do you know how to do that? Have you done that?
Okay, let me share sound. Okay, we'll start it over.
If we think about the history of the narrative around a welfare queen, it really comes out of some of our most foundational tropes about Black women and Black people.
She's the craziest and the laziest.
Evoking a narrative of cheats, of scoundrels, of parasites.
It's the welfare queen.
Feeds into this welfare queen narrative and allows states to make draconian cuts.
What is that? It's food stamps. Get so much money from the government, I just throw it away.
And all of that's really a reflection of anti-Black sentiment.
Started in the 70s in many conservative commentary, but Ronald Reagan really took it to the next level when he ran for president in 80 and 84. And he had this story he would tell on the stump. It was part of his stump speech.
In Chicago, they found a woman who holds the record. She used 80 names, 30 addresses, 15 telephone numbers to collect food stamps, Social Security, veterans benefits.
And so it was this whole image of someone abusing the system and in fact getting rich and living luxurious.
You don't ever have to really use kind of racial terms. That kind of language in and of itself evokes kind of this racial resentment.
Welfare is to help those who are the neediest of the needy and not to bring in children to the world they cannot care for.
Section 8 rental vouchers. Medicaid, free health care while I'm paying up the wazoo for health insurance. The parasites outnumber the producers.
This guy is a parasite. And my contention is that the Obama administration is encouraging parasites to come out.
With welfare reform that took place in 1996, it fundamentally changed what states could do and have a lot of discretion in how they determined who was eligible. And the system became much more punitive. It actually denied a lot of eligible folks resources.
Today we are ending welfare as we know it. We all know that the typical family on welfare today is very different from the one that welfare was designed to deal with 60 years ago.
People know exactly who you're talking about. You're really talking about Black people. And when we're talking about public assistance, oftentimes people are seeing those as Black women.
And I think people have been fighting against that narrative to say no. Actually, most people, and in particularly most women of color, are incredibly hardworking, have always been very hardworking, have often done labor that is not paid for if you think of care work.
They are often the people who have least access to services, who have the most caretaking burden, who have all these responsibilities and face discrimination in the labor markets, face predatory lending, face a plethora of challenges in our economy.
I think the long-term damaging effect of all of these stereotypes as it relates to individuals who live in poverty is that eventually it affects how you see yourself.
I go about precious.
Something you do well?
Nothing.
So much of our experiences and what we believe about ourselves is exposure and what you are allowed access to. And if everything that you ever hear about yourself is something negative based on this mentality of limits and scarcity, over time you begin to believe that for yourself.
Talking about some higher education, you're a dummy. Don't nobody want you, don't nobody need you.
I think we have to recognize that we're all exposed to this narrative. And somehow we are shaped by it. And people might say, I don't really hold that individual belief that someone is not deserving of getting assistance, of getting help when they need it. But how do we really ramp that up to a real movement? I think that we have to have a real movement behind this. And that means that people coming together across race to say we're going to actually tackle this, that we can actually do this together.
So that video is a video that was created by our ESIL's national partners at the Economic Security Project. And they all said in much clearer and better terms this idea that I've been trying to get across about like the narratives that shape us when we're talking about finances and when we're talking about what people deserve. So that was the myth of the welfare queen. Again, a video from our partners at Economic Security Project. I'll pause there too. And if anybody wants to like throw in the chat, I had like big feelings about this when I first learned that not only was this myth perpetuated, but it was like perpetuated based on the stereotype of a woman from Chicago. That obviously hits really close to home. So there's a lot in that video that I've been unpacking in this work, and I didn't know if anybody wanted to like share, either like type in a feeling word or unmute yourself and say kind of if there was anything that you took from it. Yeah, I see ridiculous. Yeah. Yeah. Katrina is saying, I vividly remember my family members perpetuating this myth growing up. And I can ascribe to that too. And one thing that I think of, especially when they have the clip of Clinton, there's something that resonates with me every day that I do this work, and that it's this idea that, you know, being white and doing this work and thinking about how having so much more access to financial means is impacting a longer legacy of where I stand in this sort of field. But one of the things that has always struck me is the fact that my grandfather grew up on welfare, and he was exactly the type of person that is considered deserving of those checks and deserving of all of that government assistance. And he pulled himself out, and yet then you had those same types of people who benefited directly from that government system, then being the same who want to tear it down because of some pretty bad stereotypes and myths. I have someone named Kaya. Kaya said the stereotype is definitely real within and outside the community, thinking that needing government aid makes you a parasite when the purpose of these programs are to be used. Those stats between Black and white mothers hit me hardest though. Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that in this work, the partner who was speaking for most of that video is Ann Price from the Insight Center, and Anne and Jumpa and the members of the Insight Center have been really doing a lot of research on how, when we talk about these narratives in the economic space, so many of them are tied specifically to anti-Blackness, and how a lot of things are just sort of cudgels or covers for anti-Blackness. All right, well, and then if folks are following us on YouTube, the video, we'll post a link so you can watch it there. And then hopefully we can get the link in, maybe we can throw up the link in the chat too if you want to look at it again. It's one that I've returned to a few times, a really well done video. So I do have an activity that we can do if y'all want. There's only a few of us, so I think if you want to, maybe I'll like look at the participants. We can do, if you want to do it, we can do a thumbs up. Otherwise, I can just talk about it now. I got one thumbs up. All right, well, let's try it. Let's open up. So if y'all go to Jamboard and let me get the, oh, I got everybody's thumbs up. All right, let's go to the Jamboard. Excuse me, I'm gonna, for whatever reason, this didn't just go through. So let me get the link for y'all and pop it in the chat. Oops, and just sent it to Julio. should send it to everybody. If you want to join me there for this narrative exercise. So I don't know if folks have used Jamboard before. The idea is just basically you can take a sticky note and you can say whatever, like for this question specifically, what economic security means to you. You can add as many or as few words as you want. You can draw something. You can add something there. So we'll give a few minutes. I'll say it's 3:40 right now. We'll do 2 more minutes of folks having an opportunity to add something, and then it'll show up on the board, and we can talk about what we see when we're done.
Folks don't know
Is
how
everybody?
Jenna she put it in the chat box.
Oh yeah, sorry. It says view only for me. Uh-oh. Well, that's a problem. I will change the permissions. Thank you for noting that. All right, so try refresh now. It should be updated. Cool. There's 2 slides, so there's 2 parts of this exercise. I have 2 like prompts. So this is the first one. We'll give, let's stop at my clock says 3:41 right now, so we'll do till 3:43. Nope. Few more seconds. All right, I think we can have folks share back now. I'll just read the ones that we have, and then we can talk about them. So economic security to us means freedom. It means liberation. It means the freedom to not have to work. It means safety. It's anxiety reducing. It has limitless outcomes. It is the floor, not the ceiling. And it's liberation from money being a central block to access what one needs for livelihood and happiness. So I really love those because they identify this sense that there is more that people are capable of, that if given the financial means, they're going to be able to do. So that's like what I love about kind of what I'm seeing on this board right now is this idea again, and somebody put liberation and safety, like you have what you need, so then you can go and do more. And you see like this, when we were talking about the slide on inequality, we talked about mental health, and we talked about like some of the disparities in terms of whether it's like criminal justice or incarceration or crime or education, and all of these things like added together. If you have economic security, it can free you to be able to have better outcomes in all of those areas as well. So whether it's health or education or something else. So we just had another one, allow folks to live their lives to their fullest potential without worrying about simply surviving. I think that's another really great one. Okay, and so then obviously if folks are like following us along, you know, feel free to judge on your own, or probably fast forward through this, but let's go to the next one, which is, so this is gonna be a 2-part exercise of, so this is something that I did with that same woman, Ann Price, who is sort of the main woman talking in the video that I showed. So their organization does a lot on narrative. And so they have these ideas of like dominant and replacement narratives. So I identified already kind of like a dominant narrative of like, we need to learn financial literacy. And then the replacement being, no, we need to learn financial freedom. So if you want to add here, like, obviously just like listing dominant things. And I have one specifically for financial freedom and financial literacy too, that I can show y'all at the end. But I'm curious just kind of what people are thinking right now about the ways that we talk about people in poverty and the ways that we should talk about people in poverty. So the left would be what we're doing and what the dominant narrative is, and the right is what we would want to see in a more equitable world. So again, I'll give another 2 minutes for this. I guess 3, because there's 2 parts of it. So I have 3:45. So at 3:48, we'll come back. All right, it's 48. So we can, folks can still keep spreading them if you have some, but on the dominant narrative side, so these again are the narratives that we're hearing, and these are the messages that we are hearing that prevent financial freedom. And these are, people are poor people, excuse me, are all lazy. It's not gonna happen, so why bother? And this I can see like self-talk definitely. Your income is directly related to your work ethic. So getting a job is the answer to poverty, which is similar to it's your own responsibility to get out of poverty and bootstraps mentality. You need experience for this role, which is definitely something we think about in the job market. And then entry level jobs don't work as hard as CEOs, so the pay gap makes sense, which I don't know if anybody else has ever worked a service job. If you've worked a service job for a single day in your life, you definitely know that's not true. But there are so many jobs where it just fully doesn't make sense that somebody's time is worth more than somebody else's. So then when we're talking about how to replace this, we can talk about like relevant experience is not exclusive to degrees. Yeah, definitely. There's an opportunity to earn and learn that's based on just like how you show up rather than what type of education you have. Poor people lack the same opportunities, job training, and jobs that those with more access to wealth, with more wealth have access to. So this idea of it being an opportunity, it's not something that we're bound to, but it's an opportunity to get us there or not. Today's minimum wage is not a livable wage, does not cover basic expenses. So again, like replacing it with that narrative of saying like, hey, this isn't really enough. Like we need more. Recognizing basic human dignity. So having housing, food, enough to live on is a right. Life has a myriad of expenses that most entry-level jobs don't begin to cover. Today's wages pale in comparison to what they were when compared to the rising cost of living. Yeah, and we definitely see, there's a lot more graphs that I could show you that prove that to be very much so true. Entry-level workers work extremely hard for their families and are not compensated humanely. I like that addition of humanely. Like, what does it mean to recognize the humanity in somebody? Refusal to take risk, indulge ambition, etc. Disbelief that loans will be approved, so never apply to begin with, won't use government aid because ego, etc. This one I don't know if it fully follows, if the person who wrote it wants to identify a little bit more, but I would assume that this is like, this is what we are talking about when we're saying like, this is why people aren't getting ahead. They are stopping themselves in their tracks so that we have people who are inhibited from that freedom because life is too expensive. So I hope this was helpful in trying to think of like what we could say when we're thinking about the economy. A lot of those were really interesting to me because they were so much about like the first, like entering in the job market, which is definitely what the people would think about if you're getting your first job. I think the other things I wanted to just identify, sorry, I'm looking at another piece. Another thing that I would want to add here too is this idea that was brought up in the video of anti-Blackness. As a dominant narrative, anti-Blackness can be a dominant narrative that really prevents and holds back so many people who are even proximate to Blackness or seen as other in some sort of way. And, you get a lot of like the colorism, but racism, xenophobia, it has a lot to do with looking different. And then you have this idea. So another one that I wanted to think about too, and as we move into sort of the policy discussion, one of the ones when I did this exercise, and again, I did it with the Insight Center team, one of the ones that was brought up for a dominant narrative was that government intervention is bad and slow and that socialism fails. But then the replacement narrative being like, this system can work for you. Like we can make government work for you. And that's something that I think really resonates with Chicago Votes, specifically with your mission. Like we're making this system work for us. We're making democracy work for us. It's our democracy and it doesn't have to be this way. Like it doesn't have, there's all these complicated programs that we have. It doesn't have to be that way. So those were two more that I wanted to bring into the fold. And hopefully, I mean, if you've never used Jamboard before, hopefully that was at least something fun. But we'll pop back on to the presentation now. And I got a few more slides kind of about what's next and how we get there. Oh, I did, as I mentioned, I sort of panned this out with financial literacy and financial freedom. Again, this is how I thought of the training today in terms of narrative. Like we have this idea that people need to learn about their finances to pull themselves out of poverty, when really the idea is we need to change the system so that people have the cash to survive. So this dominant, some of the things that when I was creating this presentation, I was thinking about were gatekeeping. So financial literacy allows for the gatekeeping, whether that's like just, it keeps gatekeepers there so people have access to power. And often it's in an economy created by white heterosexual men, able-bodied men, that's probably who it's gonna keep in power. But it also reinforces that dominant narrative of dependency, that people who are poor are dependent on the system. And often that's either just fully not true, or it's a misinterpretation, or we have created a system by which they cannot ever get out of it. You hear about these benefits cliffs. People make a little bit more money and then they drop off of if they have certain types of subsidies. The other dominant narratives, racism, xenophobia, sexism, all of the things that keep certain groups from accessing power and accessing wealth. Personal responsibility, bootstraps mentality, like, hey, it's your fault that you're poor. And then blame. So again, it's your fault that you're poor. So these are the things that financial literacy, I think, reinforce. They keep us down because they're contingent on an economy that you have to learn the economy to do better. So if you haven't learned it well enough, that means that you don't need access to the wealth, because you got to just learn it more. You got to educate yourself more. But really the system isn't built for you. So that's why we turn to financial freedom, which is a different type of narrative that I would emphasize, which changes the system. So it's looking at the system to say, like, hey, how can we give people access to what they need to survive and thrive? And so if you're looking at them like straight across, rather than being gatekeeping, it's freedom, or someone used the idea of liberation, which I really like there too. Dependency, self-reliance. Like, I can depend, if I have enough money to survive and thrive, I can depend on myself. My family can depend on me, rather than dependency on the government. The American dream. So it reestablishes that idea that, like, we have the ability to think up and be inventive and be everything that this country was founded on. And this country was founded on, of course, some troubling things too, but the idea that this is a place where you can really build yourself up, and freedom allows you that. So personal choice too, like, I am choosing to do X, Y, or Z with my money because it's the best thing for my family, rather than I don't have any means, so I don't have the opportunity to do those things. And then the last would be dignity. So it's restoring the humanity that people already intrinsically have. We're not giving it back to them. They've always had it, but it's recognizing, I guess, rather, that dignity. So, and another thing that I wanted to talk about specifically, you'll kind of notice, and I've already identified it with the term freedom, reliance, choice, dignity, the American dream, like, these are all words that you see a lot in right-wing politics, and not necessarily in progressive politics. And when people think about the economy, they often think about, like, responsibility, they think about freedom, they think about jobs, and they think about, there's a fourth word and it escapes me right now, but we don't do as good of a job on, for people who believe in people's politics, of using those terms that have inspired the right. And I think that we have a claim to them. So that's another thing to just think about when you're thinking about the terms that you use. Like, you have every right and access to use the term freedom. It can sometimes feel weird, because it has an association that's different. So now getting to the meat and potatoes of what we do, which is policy work. I just want to throw up here something that I feel really grounded by at our organization, which is we focus too much on the cost of policy change and not enough on the impact that it has on people's lives. I think you're seeing this probably a lot if you've been following anything that's happening with the federal infrastructure bill. They throw around the top line number a lot, but they don't necessarily talk about what it's going to do. And it can do a lot of really cool things, like extend the children's savings accounts, extend the children's child tax credit. So here, for especially, I know there was somebody, the different opportunities that we have for solutions. So the policy solutions that ESIL believes in, and that I'm here to sort of talk to you today, all have a unified theme, and that theme is, how do we get money to people? And so the first two are using existing systems. So that's the earned income credit and the child tax credit. So I took this from the level of Illinois politics too. So in Illinois, and this is a campaign that we ran last year and that we'll probably run again this year, we have an existing earned income credit. And that means for people who earn under a specific income threshold, they are identified as low income and they're taxpayers, they can get some of their tax money back. We already have this system in place, but it's really one of the most effective government systems that we have. So if we were to expand it, we would be able to give people more money, and that's exactly what they need to access that freedom. And so then the other thing we could do on a similar track, you probably heard about the child tax credit. The second iteration of it just went out. The second monthly payment just went out today to families, and it's had a huge impact. And what it is it's a monthly payment that the government is paying to families at the value of $250 or $300 per child. So you can get thousands of dollars back each year cumulatively, or the thing that we really love about it is that it breaks it up monthly because bills come monthly, so help should come monthly too. And we could do this in the state of Illinois, and there was actually a bill last year. Senator Simmons ran a bill last year that we supported that would have established a child tax credit in the state of Illinois. So that's another opportunity where it's like, it's the potential for an existing structure. It's a structure that exists at the federal level, and we could replicate that at the state level. And it's something that policymakers already see and know. And the other thing I just want to identify here too is, like, when we're talking about earned income tax credit recipients, those people are people who are often audited at the same level as like those, when we were talking about some of those like high income earners on that wealth inequality graph before, they're often audited, which means like called out for their taxes at the same rate. So we also do need, like, to support these policy measures, we also do need a strong IRS, which is not something that's been popular for a long time. People think of the IRS as an enemy, but we need a strong IRS and a strong government to help get this money out the door. So the other types of policy interventions that we believe in are a guaranteed income, which I will definitely talk about in more detail in the next slide, and then also direct cash transfers. So these are ways, like guaranteed income is every month, kind of like the child tax credit has been structured. Every month it gives you an income floor. It gives you something that you can rely on, and it's not, the policy is however you create it. So it can be $500, it can be $100, it can be $1,000, or a direct cash transfer, which is something like, think about the stimulus check. Those were a direct cash transfer. They did happen 3 times, but it was a one-time payment. So then when we think about others, like we talk about reparations, but we were specifically interested in how guaranteed income could be used as a vehicle for reparations. We believed in the progressive income tax. Again, we were really concerned about tampering the top. There's a lot of anti-monopoly work that's done at a federal level. It's harder to do that at the state level. The other thing that we're really interested in is simplified tax filing. So this is the idea that, like, taxes are so complicated and make you want to pull your hair out. And especially for people who have stressful lives, they don't have time to worry about things. They're worried about work and they're worried about their families, and they already have low income and they're not really expecting either a large refund or they're expecting money back, and it's complicated to figure out how to get there. We can make the tax system way easier. Ideally, Economic Security for Illinois believes that poor people should not pay any money in taxes. They should just never have to pay into the system. But there are ways that we could also make filing easier and automatic. The government already knows how much money you owe unless you have a very complicated tax circumstance, and you're usually not there unless you make a ton of money and have a bunch of assets. And so for most people, the government already knows how much you owe, and it could be simplified. There's a lot of reasons, a lot of political reasons why it hasn't happened. And I would just note the strength of the tax lobby, and there's a great Hassan Minhaj had a great Patriot Act episode on that if you want to know more about it. Then the benefits clips, which is something that I already mentioned, which is something about like having, so if you have SNAP and TANF and unemployment or all of these other like programs that already exist, there can be certain thresholds that you make money and then you lose your other benefits. So you might lose your Medicaid, or you might lose any sort of like your housing voucher. And those are really, really problematic because they do keep people boxed in, and it does create a dependency. And then another one that we're interested in is public banking, because there are so many people who don't have access to a bank account, and the banking system is very convoluted and pretty racist, and has a whole bunch of ways that it fails to serve people's needs. And so people don't really have a place to put their money. So they're using really expensive services like check cashers and currency exchange, and often turn to things like payday lenders and stuff like that, which is a problem. So guaranteed income, well, I promised you that we would go a little bit more in depth there. And this is really the one that I'm most excited to talk to this crew about, because guaranteed income is a very excited policy intervention that's taking on a lot of steam lately. And what it is, it's a policy that gives a monthly check to a specific group of people. It's designed based on a targeted need and a targeted impact. And it's meant to supplement the existing social safety net. And I put a picture of Martin Luther King Jr. there. Probably within the 2 years before he died, he came out in support of guaranteed income as a way to end poverty. But also this is a policy that has its roots in like Milton Friedman, and technically Nixon had one. So there's precedent for it being something that's not just, that has civil rights champions, but that's not just a new idea, is basically what I wanted to say. And that it has unique allies across the aisle. Universal basic income, though, is different from guaranteed income. And these often get conflated, and I understand why, because they really are quite comparable. But when we hear about UBI, like that's why I put the picture of Andrew Yang, because he kind of basically ran on this for his presidential campaign, where he was like, everybody gets $1,000, you get $1,000, you get $1,000. And that is great. We would love a universal basic income. The problem with many people's proposals for universal basic income at this point are created with the intention of being a sub for other government services. So instead of getting your SNAP and your TANF and your housing voucher and whatever, you would just get money from the government, because that's an easier way for the government to help you. And that's actually like a really libertarian way of thinking about it. We don't want to do that. We also don't think that the top income earners in a universal basic income, Jeff Bezos also gets $1,000. I don't think he needs it. It might come out of his taxes later. Actually, probably not for him, because he figures out how to get out of it. But for high income earners, say like doctors and lawyers and whatnot, they don't really need that money. So we would rather it go directly into the hands of those who need it most. So some examples of this where it's happened are Stockton. So Mayor Michael Tubbs, he was really like kind of the one who spearheaded a national movement here, and he's the founder of Mayors for a Guaranteed Income, and there's now I think like 40 mayors across the nation. But he had the Stockton Seed demonstration started giving $500 a month to residents of Stockton in 2018, I believe. And the 2-year studies show that employment and productivity went up when people got this money. Their stress went down. They paid off debt. They spent money on necessities and not drugs. Again, that's another big, when we talk about narratives, that's another thing that we hear, is that people are irresponsible with their own money, and that's why it's their fault. But the data just proves it otherwise. So there's more, there's a really great piece that Annie Lowry wrote in The Atlantic, but there's tons of pieces on this. And so if you just search Stockton, Michael Tubbs, or Mayors for a Guaranteed Income, you'll find a lot more. And the results are really fascinating. Also on our social media, you can find access to a lot of that. The next is Magnolia Mothers Trust, which is a program that I specifically love. Aisha Narando is a woman who is also in that video that we watched, and she is the CEO of Springboard to Opportunities, and they created this trust, and it was a bunch of Black moms in Jackson, Mississippi, who designed this program for Black moms. So $1,000 per month for 12 months for 100 families. By Black women living in federally subsidized housing. And the results, again, have been amazing. And the thing I really love about this is they're profiling a lot of these individuals, like this woman here, and they're profiling them in Ms. Magazine, and you can read their stories. And when we talk about narrative, like it's really important to hear directly from these people about how this is impacting their lives. So it might not be as big of a big of a pool. It's only 100 families, but it's having a huge impact. And that impact is just resonating in such a way that you can read about and it's really inspiring. Then, and the other thing that's really cool about Magnolia Mothers Trust, I think they extended it during the pandemic because they knew that the need was so great. So that was really awesome that they had that infrastructure. They were able to give more in a time of need. The other one that's very cool, and it's technically launching next week, but the Chicago Futures Fund, which is from our partners at Equity and Transformation, and that's going to be specifically for system impacted individuals. And so Rich Wallace, who's the director there, had an interview this week in Color Lines, and you can read about it more there. I have all of these linked. I promise I will give out the links. But the idea is to move toward reparations. So the idea is to use a guaranteed income for system impacted individuals to get us to a place where we can have those R3 going toward reparations in the form of a guaranteed income, which is different than there's another program in Evanston, Illinois, has the first ever reparations program. That is housing reparations. This is a little different because it's like direct cash and reparations for people impacted by the war on drugs again. So those are some examples. But then the last thing I would say is if any of this was inspiring to you or any of it was interesting to you, my asks would be that you keep in touch. And so that would be follow us on social media. We're at EconSecureIL on all platforms. We also have opportunities that, like, if you felt really personally impacted by this and you want to tell us your story, I'm always looking for opportunities to get people's stories out. And I think specifically young people have such a voice that they need to stake a claim in the economy, and the future of the economy is yours, right? So we need it to work for all of us. So if you're somebody who could benefit from $500 one time or every month, tell us your story and tell us why. And there's a way to do that on our website really easily. And we won't share it unless, of course, explicitly given permission. And then you can join us in advocacy. There is right now a petition that we do have for guaranteed income for Chicago. We're trying to build that ecosystem here so that we can get a city-run or eventually a state-run guaranteed income program because we believe that it is the way of the future. So, and then if there are any other questions, you can always follow up with me. You can find me on any of those social media platforms. I run them for our organization, but also at Jenna at economicsecurity.il.org. So that is what I have for y'all today. Is there anything that I can clarify before we close out? Or if anyone has anything to add?
So the bill that y'all were running, was it voted no on, or was it just not called?
Yes, I can give a little bit of a analysis there too. So let's go to the bill that we ran was for the earned income credit. So I'm going to go to our website and show you a little bit about this. So the bill that we had, which Chicago Votes was a partner in, was this making the earned income credit work for Illinois. So we had a bill this past year, and there was one prior. And it was SB 2184 and HB 2792, Senator Sims and Representative Ammons. It would have expanded the earned income credit that Illinois already has. So right now, you already have it in the state of Illinois, and people get, $600 on average from it. It's not as big as the federal one. You get more like $3,000 from that if you qualify. But the bill would have expanded the earned income credit to more groups of people. Right now, the way it's structured is that the state program matches the federal program in terms of eligibility, and it matches it at the value of 18%. So anyone who gets federal EITC also gets Illinois EIC. They get 18% of that money in addition to whatever they get federally. What we want to do long-term is expand the people who are excluded. So there's a lot of important groups that are excluded. One is childless young adults, 18 to 24. So people who are in poverty in 18 to 24 working, maybe they're not in college. We know that they can't, if you can't necessarily afford to go to college, you definitely probably could benefit from these extra dollars coming into your pocket if you have a job. But if you don't have children right now, you're excluded from it. So we want to expand it to that group. 65 and older, so it's the same on the other end of the spectrum. If you're over 65, you don't get it if you're working still, and there is an extreme increase in elder poverty, especially as our population is getting older. This is a huge problem. And then the other group who is excluded is ITIN filers. So immigrants who file with, rather than having a social security number, it's called an ITIN number to file their taxes. They're paying into the tax system. They deserve to get it back. So then so those are the three groups. And then we also wanted to bring in a fourth group, which would be caregivers. And so we could do something with a child tax credit when we're running it this next year. But the idea would be like, if you can't work because you are giving care full time for somebody, and maybe it's a child, maybe it's an elder or qualifying dependent, a person with disabilities, you should get some money to provide for their needs. Often we hear from caregivers, and it's like they just don't have the time to earn an income, or more to the point, they usually don't have the money. The cost of care is so expensive that they don't have the money to pay somebody else so that they can then go to work. So it would have been impacted over like 1.25 million Illinoisans in 500,000 households. It did not pass. It got through. It was supposed to be included. We had hoped it would be included in the budget, and it was not included in the budget. We did earn a win because of our advocacy. There was a one-time payment that went to immigrants who were probably in that ITIN qualifying group, and also some recipients who don't even have an ITIN number. So there is a fund that ICER runs that we were able to get, but that's 1 year. It's temporary, and we want to make sure that there's lasting, sustainable results. So we would love to see the earned income credit in Illinois expanded to all those groups I listed. We could add a child tax credit on top of it, and then just use those vehicles that already exist to give people more money. But yeah, well, we're gearing up for another fight. So if you're interested in advocacy there, you can certainly join us. All right, any more questions before we close out? I'll go back to this so you can see the petitions. I'll drop those petition links. And if you want to sign the petition and tell us your story, and we'll see you online. I hope everybody has a good weekend.
Thank you so much, Jenna, for this great presentation. Super informative, wonderful. We'll definitely be sharing the petition out to our listserv, and